see, like Class and Curve,
Right,
where signage is limited, the back of the store
Yes.
is facing the street.
right.
There's not that much parking in the middle. And so I'm wondering, it seems to be doing well, but on the other hand, there's a lot of vacant spaces in there. And so is it really doing well?
Well,
Or
it
is
wasn't always doing well. And so the way that shopping center was designed was great for destination tenants. So restaurants and bars, food, you're gonna seek them out and go to them and you're gonna stay for a while. Dinner, alcohol sales, people go and stay for a while. If it's lunch, it needs to be convenient, in and out, you need a lot of parking. But like Republic, and Upper Crust, Cafe 501, I wouldn't say 501 is much because they have such a lunch crowd, but for a while, the parking and activity was mainly for meals, not soft goods. Soft goods took years before they filled in to have that walking traffic that's so important. The ones they were only the few retailers that were in there that weren't food, they struggled. You have to fill in for them to do well. And so it's at a much better place now. There's many of them that are doing well, but the overhead is, the rent it's actually not bad compared to something like Chisholm Creek. That was really risky. If you don't go into that knowing you're gonna have the sales to be able to pay that kind of overhead. So, but yeah, this market, they have to fill in to do well. They're doing a lot better now. Restaurants, 2 of them can go right away and do fine.
Thank you.
My name is Pascal Autry. I'm an architect here in town. I was asked to come and discuss the construction process, and what was listed was ground up remodel and versus lease. And ground up is by far the most that architects do, although I've had remodels where a company wants to move their offices in an old grocery store, for instance, which was a lease, and we're actually working for the landlord. So it kind of all, intertwines a little bit. The first thing that we as architects are interested in is the site selection. What does the company do? How many employees do they have? Is it a manufacturing as well as the office, or is it strictly an office building? Those sorts of things. And usually they've already purchased the land, and sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's bad. And what I mean about that is the land is what triggers everything. If you've got a bad piece of dirt, whether it's structurally bad, or you didn't realize when you bought it there's a utility easement going diagonally through the site, it makes laying out the site a whole lot more complicated. And so this kind of goes hand in hand when you're working with your broker to make sure that you're not painting yourself in a corner before you even get started in investing. And a lot of these, and I don't want to speak out of turn here, but a lot of these land deals are contingent on, hey, we'll close on the deal once we get site plan approval from the town. But like Oklahoma City doesn't have that process. Edmond only does. And it's kind of surprising because usually it's the bigger communities that have that process in place that you can use to your advantage. But so first thing is zone. Can you do your use there? And the next thing, what are the rules about real estate? Location. Okay, great. But what's the next one? The most important are water and sewer. If you don't have either one of those, you're not building anything. Okay, and then you can always drill a well. You can do a septic system. You can put a forced sewer line, those sorts of things. But if you don't have enough room on the site to incorporate that, well, for your use, you might be in trouble there. Then environmental, which is usually taken care of. Anybody who's going to finance it is going to want at least a phase 1 on the dirt, meaning they've tested it, make sure there's no contaminants. Also, when you're looking at land, you might ask them if they have a soils report. It's referred to as a geotech report in the industry. And they go out there and they drill holes in the site, and from that they can tell if the site's been filled, if the dirt's good, if there's any contaminants. It gives the architects the engineering data they need to design the foundations for the building. And a lot of times these things have already been done. You just need to ask for them. And then the other thing you could ask for is if they have an ALTA survey. An ALTA is American Land Title Association, is that the correct wording? And it has specific guidelines of what that survey, all the components it has to have on it. Such things as easements, if there's any deed restrictions. You can have a perfectly big piece of dirt, but whoever sold it has a retail center and they've got a deed restriction saying you can't build a retail center here for 100 years. So make sure you don't paint yourself in a corner there. Also, if there are deficiencies, well, you can adjust the price to pay the fair market value for the land. So just by doing the proper homework, and we've had people approach us that, hey, we're looking at this piece of dirt, this is what we want to do there, and this is what we know, we'll pay you to look into it and kind of do this type of study that I'm talking about. And so we as architects, we deal with civil engineers, and they're usually the guys that design the site, basically, the drainage, the utilities, those sorts of things. And then the mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers, as referred to as the MEPs. And some are really good at some types of projects and not at others. So I have different groups. We don't always use the same two firms. We have a half dozen for all these others because, like I just said, some are good at some things, some are others. And especially the civil engineer, you want one who's familiar with the town you're building in. If they do 90% of their work, 95% here in Oklahoma City, and the rest out in rural areas, and they got to go to Edmond, and they don't know anybody there, or got to go to Norman, don't really know anybody there, it really helps to have people that know face-to-face, first name basis, that can go in there and get things answered. Hey, we've got a problem here with our driveways, what can we work out? That sort of thing. And then also land surveying is very important as far as, making sure that there's and title companies tie into that as far as any hidden things via easements or clear title, those sorts of things. We can talk about finding land, but it's very similar when you hire a broker. It's very similar to a residential. You want to hire somebody who does that. So if somebody does retail, there she is. And whether she's doing the leasing, she knows what retailers want, speaks their language, what they need. And so they're not going to show you something that just totally wouldn't work because they don't understand retail. From the architectural standpoint, what we'll start off by doing is a preliminary scheme, which is the layout of the site, followed by a building plan, and then exterior building elevations. And sometimes the way I work with clients is I get to know them, get to feel them out, and then I'll give them a proposal. Well, here's what we'll charge for the whole thing. For the preliminaries, we're going to charge you a lump sum. And then it lets me go through the process with them, and it builds us time to make sure that they like us and we like them. And you can kind of get a feel for if it's going to take forever to get answers out of these, out of the client to get to the point where you know what you're going to actually be building. The other thing that works very well is I can only go as fast as you give me decisions and answers. And so I schedule, whether it's once a week, usually about every week and a half to 2 weeks is a good kind of turnover, where we meet, we decide who needs to decide what, and then, we got a meeting here in about next week, I better start working on this. So the next time we meet, everybody's got the information to keep the process going. Tell you kind of a funny story. I've done work for Eskimo Joe's forever in Stillwater, and Stan Clark and his wife wanted to build a new house. And so we were designing the house, and man, I wouldn't hear from him for 2-3 weeks, and this and that. And finally he called me up and he said, man, we gotta do something. I gotta get this house built because, I'm 50 years old and we want to have another kid, but we don't want to have a kid and, be building a house and this and that. And you just gotta get us moving. And that was the first time that I personally had kept someone from being born because we weren't moving fast enough. So we implemented that process. We'd meet every Wednesday night. He'd bring burgers from Joe's or pizza from Mexico Joe's. And we'd eat and then we'd go over it and off we went. Then a few years later, I ran into him at the ball game with the kids, and the second batch of kids, they had twins. And he comes walking out with his daughter and the 2 little twins, and we're talking, and I look over at him, I said, hey, sorry for the holdup there. Anyway, once we decide what the preliminaries are going to be, then we all know what we're building. Then you get more into, well, how do we want to build the building? If it's a smaller building, it's going to be more economical to do wood frame. Okay, but then there's limitations. Once you get to a certain size, you have to fire sprinkle, which people, think it's James Bond. You put lighter up there and all the heads go off. Well, it's just one head that's going to go off. Those sorts of things. And then it's the decor, which sometimes can take longer, especially if there's a lot of family members involved. We just put the whole thing together. Another thing I like to do is I go and meet face-to-face, at least with the fire department, because the building codes, that's pretty black and white, how you got to design a building and what's got to be done. With the fire departments, if they're going to require a fire lane, if they're going to want the hydrants here or there, those sorts of things, I sit down with them, show it to them, so that when they receive our blueprints, they've already seen it. They've already made the decision. And so they're less likely to change their mind. And so it helps to, and then also I have the civil engineer go talk to the stormwater department. It's always stormwater seems to be the big drag around central Oklahoma. I don't know what the deal is for getting your permits, but so they have the same thing. You're kind of greasing the skids without them really knowing it. So that's another trick we do. I could ramble on, but anybody have any questions? It's kind of the gist of it.
So when you're designing or speccing out foundations or slabs, do you spec out like the concrete part of it where you say, okay, you need to put a 3,500 here or 3,000 here? And what I notice a lot is in bid submittals, people say, well, I want 3,000 PSI here, but you got to use a minimum of X amount of cement, X amount of flash, and usually that's way over designed. And on the bidding process, as a producer, if we look at, okay, we have our price for 3,000 that takes X amount of cement over here, and we have our 3,500 that takes X amount, usually it's kind of like ODOT, everything's over designed. So how do you come up with what your 3,000 is versus what a producer 3,000? Where's the...
Yeah, the geotech will have some language in there,
Right.
and they tend to be, and I've got nothing against geotechs, but geotechs, they're like a bunch of old college professors with all these theories and,
Right.
how things, are supposed to be in the real world. And when it comes down to it, that's not really the real world, and it's total overkill.
Absolutely.
So you have to take that with a grain of salt. Now, if it's a 5-story office building, yeah, I'm going to go with but if it's a, 3,000 square foot wood frame, single tenant owner wood frame, office building, we're not going to go that route.
Right.
So there is no black and white answer to your question. It's just, it all boils down to common sense. And, You know, and I beat into our consultants is, look, we don't need all the, what's the old term? I don't mind being on cutting edge, I just don't want to be on the bleeding edge.
Right.
Okay, I mean, they get all these salespeople that come in, and they come into us with all these big fancy bells and whistles and all this kind of stuff, and these people are running a business. They just want to, the building isn't some ego thing they're trying to build. It's there to help them make money.
Right.
Okay, and so if they want a lime green lobby, I'll give them a lime green lobby if it helps their, you know, their customers. You know, I personally don't like that, but it's not my building. So it's keep things simple where there's less maintenance. You know, if you can use the same size package rooftop units, do that instead of having a 3-ton over here and a 15-ton back here. You know, it's just, it's, at the end of the day, it's not all that complicated unless you make it, so.
Right. Well, a lot of it, you know, concrete evolves just like everything else. I mean, our chemical producers are finding ways to put a certain chemical in, and those will give you X amount of strength. And I mean, ODOT's, you know, seriously over designs their spec, but and then the city of Oklahoma City now follows ODOT standards, and you're like, you want a 3,000 to ODOT, but in a 28-day break, it's kicking at 4,500, 5,000 PSI. That's what we're getting.
Yeah.
And if you go to bid it with what ODOT spec is, you're like, God, to be competitive, you know, you've got to cut your price, even though it's really, they're saying a 3,000, but it's more or less 4,000 or 4,500.
And they're probably.
It makes it hard on, you know, to be competitive bid, because obviously we have a certain, you know, line that we need to be at, but I don't know how they come up with their spec.
Do you think ODOT does that because the higher PSI concrete is going to weather better?
Who knows? It's hard to see what ODOT, well, try to think what they're thinking. It's difficult at times, but I just noticed on a lot of architects, they say, well, you can't run any fly ash. It's got to be 100%. That's more on a producer standpoint, you know. So I was just wondering how you guys come up with a minimum or a maximum of,
Yeah, no black and white answer.
right, yeah.
And a lot of, you know, architects and engineers, they'll just write off the geotag.
Okay.
You know, that's what it said to do.
Okay.
You know, like that type answer.
Okay.
And then if you're gonna build a building, don't underestimate, you concentrate on the building, you don't think about the site. The site costs a lot of money. And so, don't turn a blind eye to it. And look, if you're gonna be there for 10 years, you know, and you need to save money, y'all put in an asphalt parking lot. But if you're not, concrete's probably gonna be better for you in the long haul.
Yeah. Over the maintenance, yeah.
So, and it depends on the business though, so. Anything else?
Jim, right?
Yes.
I'll tell you a story about, you're talking about concrete strength, which I know nothing about. You know everything about it. I was financing a project over the last couple of years, and it involved a parking deck, above ground parking deck. And it was a ramp up to tenants. And somehow during the process of construction, and you could literally look up to the parking deck, exactly where the columns are, above that, on the surface up there, they all cracked. You could exactly see the cracks in the columns. And so what was interesting to me is, and what they determined, and it took mediation, it took people suing each other, whose fault was that? And as it turned out, they determined that the subcontractor that installed the rebar placed it too low in the pour, caused it to crack at the surface. But the real difficult thing about that, everyone was blaming it on everybody. Is it the concrete man's fault? Is it the architect's? Is it the civil? Whose fault is it?
When it's all
It
said
was
and
a-
done,
it was a
it's
mess.
down to the producer. I mean, that's who everybody wants to point the finger at. You know, when I'm talking to a new customer or whatever, and they start talking about cracks, and I'm like, look,
Concrete cracks.
there's two guarantees in
Yeah.
concrete, it's gonna get hard and it's gonna
It's
crack.
gonna crack.
Is it cosmetic, is it structural?
Yeah.
And then, you know, some of the builders, I mean, the residential guys I deal with, it's all about sub-base. Did they compact their sub-base? And, you know, if we're dry and then all of a sudden we go through a wet period, ground swell, clay
Yeah.
swells, and
Yeah.
everything moves.
Well, this is,
Nightmare.
obviously, the difficulty in this particular case was it was above ground.
Right.
So the, you know, oh my God, this thing's gonna fall in. It's gonna cave in on all these cars parked out here from
Yeah.
the upper deck. That was the real dicey part.
Oh, yeah, it can get dicey, everybody wants to say,
Yeah.
well, it's,
And the integrity and the life of that deck
Is that project
is
solved?
reduced. Yeah, because that rust, if water gets in there, it begins to rust.
What was the resolution, or is it
They-
still caught up in court?
The first thing my customer did was well, it took them a while to do some forensic work on they immediately coated it and coated it and coated it and made it as seal-proof
Seal-
as possible
like,
to keep that water from going into the rebar. There were enough insurance companies involved. They settled it.
Wow.
They settled it. But it took a year and a half or two just to go through the mediation and the lawsuits behind it. Basically. The integrity of the building, of that deck now, I'm convinced it's okay. It's not gonna fall in. But it was just my first project ever that there was this dispute on whose fault is this?
Right.
Yeah, so.
Nice. Thanks, Pascal. It's interesting. I know the architect involved on that, hasn't been fun for them. Okay, so we're a general contractor. So our purpose is that we want to contribute to the world by providing experience that inspires and delights the community. And our mission is that we bring teams together to build projects faster than any other general contractor. I'm going to go over the 4 major types of construction methods. We left out the one that Mel had mentioned, which is cost plus. We don't advocate for it, and we've had clients ask us to do cost plus, and we always tell them we believe there's a better means to that. So design bid build is your traditional form where the architect has a set of plans and they have direct contact with the owner, and the owner's hiring the general contractor. And that's a bid process to the general contractors as well as to the subcontractors. The pros is it's going to yield you lowest possible price, and your construction documents and specs are 100% complete. The cons is the competitive bidding process limits the contractor's ability to navigate design to construction discrepancies. Jim, as you pointed out, with the input as a producer, that you guys have value to talk to the engineer to say, hey, how about we change up this mix to save the client some money, but also yield this just as good of a standard, right? And hit that 3,500 PSI versus the mix is actually yielding a 4,500 PSI, so you're over designing. There's incentive to be competitive, and that results in items being left out because of that process that you're getting 2 to 3 weeks to bid out a process. And so this is the traditional city, state, and federal type of bidding that goes out. And then in this method, you end up yielding the most change orders because it's very black and white, and it's not as synergetic for the architect and the GC to work hand in hand. It ends up being more in the finger pointing, and as I like to call it, sibling rivalry. Right? When we talk to architects, my very first conversation with them is, we don't want to have sibling rivalry. We want to have a great output for the client, and we want them to be able to enjoy the process and do it again. This was a project that we did as a design bid build, and it was a Chase Bank. The interesting part is, we were low bid, and they came back and still wanted to cut out another $100,000, of course. And so they just keep squeezing and squeezing. That project was done in 6 months. So the next method that I want to talk about is construction management. And so in this scenario, the architect and the general contractor are able to work more hand in hand. You're not bidding out your general contractor, but you still are bidding out your subcontractors. And the pros to this is it saves money, and it's really good for your technical complex multi-phase projects where you're working with the architect to say, okay, here's phase 1, how are we going to integrate phase 2? We're looking at a project right now that is at a medical facility, and so you have to keep the medical side up and running while they're remodeling the office space, and that gets really messy. And so the construction management is perfect. It reduces risk because you can do a construction management GMP through the AIA contracting methodology. And so it gives a ceiling cost to the client, but also keeps the project moving efficiently. And it reduces scheduling processes. This is the cons, it can take longer. It just all depends, as Pascal pointed out, if you have an efficient system that you're meeting on a regular basis and you're really pushing on that client to give you answers in a quick time method. The last one is the significant portions of total services which the construction manager is remunerated are not subject to competitive bidding. Again, this is where you're not competitively bidding your GC, but you are bidding your subcontractors. Many times clients and architects will do a CM interview, and so you'll talk about your fees there, and you can also be competitive with your GC in that methodology. This is a project that we did in Dallas, and that was a major renovation of IBC Bank, which was great because it was an existing building, it was mid-rise, so we had to ensure that the 7 stories above us still had access in and out of this major lobby space that we were extending the offices into, and then as well as completely demoing and rebuilding the interior bank. Negotiated bid. Again, this is more of an interview process with the GC. The architect and client sit down, and after picking your GC, you sit down and negotiate that price where you need to stand. And so this really works on your projects that have your standard building material type, kind of like retail. And it gives the general contractor the liberty to suggest your add alternates and present cost savings and value engineering. The bid is predicated on the building general contractor's qualification. So when you start getting into these projects of negotiated bid, CM, and design build, you're relying on the capability of that GC. So it's really important that you're interviewing them and understanding that they've done the work that you're asking them to do. Lack of competitive costs may drive up your overall price in this instance. In this situation, this was the Zaxby's that we did a negotiated bid. These retail locations, especially that stand them out, like McDonald's, Andy's Frozen Custard, they know exactly where they need to stand. So the negotiated bid works because they know what price point they have to hit that ROI to make their whole entire deal work. So it really controls that idea that cost may be driven. Lastly, design build. In this method, it's an integrated method where the general contractor is hiring the architect and the team is working as one. You're bringing the subcontractors to the table early on in the programming stages and asking them for their input. So you have your subcontractors, you have your architect and your engineer sitting at the table, and they're discussing this. They're deciding, is it going to be a metal wall? Is it going to be tilt wall? And what are some value engineering methods? And talking to them about that concrete mix. So this is a very integrated method. So its flexibility is great, and it accommodates a tight budget. Streamlined processes to personalize that experience for the client. You're really able to capitalize on innovation because you are bringing to the table the people that are doing this day in, day out, your subcontractors and the engineers that have, and the architects that have the practical and daily knowledge to ensure that there's that synergy. The cons is you may have some low transparency in bidding because you are bringing subcontractors to the plate early on. Again, it's up to the general contractor to ensure that they're controlling that price. The design team working for the contractor upsets the typical systems of checks and balances that ensures the quality in product. And so what we mean by that is typically this is an upset for the client. So if the client is used to that design bid build, they'll never get it in their head of enjoying the design build process. So you have to ensure that the client understands this process and they're willing to let go of that competitive bid. In that instance, this was Dunlop-Cotting where we did design build, and it was a great project. We had a budget, and people that go into this building, the client says they all think that he spent twice as much on this building than he really did. And so this was an incredible example of being able to adhere to what the client's wants and needs were inside of a tight constrained budget. So just kind of end, I want to thank everybody for their time. And it's really, it doesn't matter which project delivery method you choose. Just remember the strengths and weaknesses of the individuals working on your project within. That will have the most impact in the manner that you organize your contracts, which are the most important. And as Mel had mentioned, we use AIA contracts. We believe it's a great contract methodology that works and is fair to all parties involved. So Henry Ford said it best, everyone moving forward together, the success takes care of itself. So I want to thank everyone for their time today and appreciate you coming. Any questions?
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
That was great info right there.